Hello, everyone. I'm Katrina London, Manager of Collections and Curatorial Projects at the Pocantico Center of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. Once home to the Rockefeller family, the Pocantico Center's verdant campus in the scenic hills of the Hudson Valley has been host to some of the most influential leaders, thinkers, and creative minds of the last century. Today, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund continues to bring together people at Pocantico through a robust slate of conferences, artist residencies, tours, performances, and educational programs. Please visit our website at rbf.org/events to sign up for our mailing list and learn about our upcoming programs. The Pocantico Center rests in what is known as Lenape-Hoking, unceded land of the Lenape, as well as other related peoples indigenous to this area. We honor their legacy, past, present, and future, in gratitude and appreciation of their stewardship of this land for generations and in recognition of their displacement and dispossession. Thank you very much for joining us today for Conversations on Sculpture, a lecture by Arnaldo Ugarte focusing on Kaiket's significant sculpture collection. Through an arrangement with the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the RBF is responsible for the preservation of the buildings, grounds, and collections at Pocantico. The majority of the sculpture collection is located throughout Kaiket's gardens, and they were collected in two phases. The first comprises classical figures and fountains from ancient and Renaissance models and by American sculptors of the early 20th century, which were selected by John D. Rockefeller Jr. and architect William Wells Bosworth between 1906 and 1920. Later, between 1962 and 1979, Nelson Rockefeller added 120 pieces by modern masters. Now, I'm delighted to introduce my colleague Arnaldo Ugarte, sculpture conservation technician at the Pocantico Center since 2004. He will be discussing a selection of highlights from his work maintaining Kaiket's outdoor sculpture collection. Arnaldo is a practicing sculptor who studied sculpture at Pratt Institute, and he gained deep hands-on experience and knowledge in sculpture conservation at metal foundries, the Donald M. Kendall Sculpture Park at PepsiCo, and other institutions. He is a member of the American Institute for Conservation and the Latin American Metals Group. Now I'll leave it to you, Arnaldo.
Thank you, Katrina, for your introduction. It is a pleasure to be your host today. I will share with you some of my experiences and perspectives on sculpture conservation. The outdoor sculpture collection at Kaiket varies in size, materials, and their placement. It has been said that Nelson Rockefeller had an eye for placing his sculptures. Once he was called an environmental artist, which he embraced as he had a great passion for modern art. It is the placements of sculpture that brings these works to engage on a dialogue with nature and architecture, consequently extending it to a conversation with the visitors. We can see the echoes of forms, movement, color, textures that bring the viewer to contemplate this space, to question, and to enjoy through written words, photographic images, and dance that is relevant to Kaiket today. We find many sculptures throughout the collection, such as cast bronzes with patinas of various colors, high polished metals such as bronze and stainless steel, and carved wood, as well as marble and granite. Many of these technical calculations, and craft and traditions have contributed for the making of these works, and today we assume the responsibility to care for them. In this collection, we will find the names of artists that are familiar, some of them whose works are in museums, public spaces, corporate gardens, and private homes. The works of these artists have contributed impacting society with their philosophy on a changing world of their time.
So I will just share with you aspects of what has been like for me here. in nearly 2 decades of working with a collection and learning a great deal. Here we have a sculpture that made by Alexander Liverman, and it's made out of steel. It's a painted steel. And when you actually first come to Kaiket and drive in, this will be the first piece that you will see. And one of the things that I do here is I maintain the collection. The maintenance of the collection requires cleanings when they need it. They require agents that actually will help out, take out the dirt. And with that, I use a great deal of very soft brushes to help. And at times the process is repeated. So until we finally have a clean surface. Now, for painted surfaces, one of the things that happens is that we have to always remember for an outdoor collection in particular, the circumstances for any collection in any given place, they're always very unique to a place. And I would say that, for us, well, we have a lot of sun during the summer, and during the winter months, sometimes we can actually have very low temperatures, as well as a great deal of snow, which with that we'll have, if the sculptures happen to be close to the road, it's very likely that they may end up having some sort of salt. And this is a bit of an example. As you drive in, you will see the sculpture. For some of you who have visited but not been able to be here in the winter months when we're actually close to the public, but this is a part of a scene that you will actually see in a very snowy day. And it is quite magical and wonderful. And one of the things that I certainly have learned a great deal in here is that, well, when we are in the elements, many things can happen. In this particular case, we actually had an accident where the sculpture was impacted by a very large branch. And at this moment, our only option is to actually have the sculpture fixed. So we have conducted a great deal of research with the curator, and we also been very fortunate to consult with colleagues and fabricators to basically, do the right thing, which is restore the sculpture to its former condition. Now, we're still in the process, so it's always very, very interesting, and sometimes there are new approaches that can take rather than a new fabrication. In this case, we're actually very happy to say that our intention and as our responsibilities is to maintain the work as close as possible to the original. However, in some cases, I'm pretty sure that we will be challenged with finding new ways of doing so. And for that, we are, again, we're very fortunate to have found partners who help us to think this through and to come up with good solutions. Here we have a sculpture by Tony Smith, and this is right below. If you are facing the Liverman and you look further down, you will actually see a Tony Smith cigarette. And these are different angles, as you can see. And of course, you can also see this is a really wonderful perspective where you can see from the middle of it, and you see at the very end a sculpture by Kenneth Snelson. However, at this very moment, you can see a lot of grass across the surface. And in this case, one of the things that I try to do is to get rid of that grass as quickly as possible so that it doesn't dry and stays next to the painted surface that can potentially damage some of those areas. Now, time to time, sometimes depends on the type of paint that are used in a sculpture, they may lose their luster. And as they lose their luster, sometimes also there may be failure. And if this failure begins to be more across the surface of the sculpture, then we normally consider the possibilities of repainting the sculpture. In this particular case, this is a Tony Smith from a different angle, actually from the top down. And at this very stage is actually the priming. And it's really fascinating to see these. In this case, we also hire a conservator and a crew that comes with a conservator sometimes. And they are the ones who go through the entire process. And my job is to basically assist them and also learn to be observant of how this process happen, so that in the near future or in the long term, we hope, we are familiarized onto how we can read if the surfaces are working. And this is another perspective that I took. And here we have now a painted sculpture, which looks really wonderful. It's been a number of years by now. So unfortunately, at that time, the grass was very brown, as you can see it. But today, with lots of rain outside, it's just magnificent. And as we are turning in the road from the Liverman, to our right, actually, we will see these wonderful beaches. And in the very middle of it is this sculpture that's called Granite Snot, made by the artist Shinkishi Tajiri. And this magnificent piece, well, it requires a great deal of work because of it attracts a lot of dirt. There is so much that flies through that area, and for some reason, either it's the paint or it just be against the very unique circumstance of the piece being in the middle of these trees and the road and so on. And as you can see, I'm preparing with the scaffold to do some cleaning. And this is actually how it will look after it's done, which is quite magnificent. I wish it was that sort of a convenience, but there's a bit of a process. Not too long ago, also encountered that there were a number of faults occurring in the sculpture. And one of the things that was failing was some of the structure, particularly at the top. So nothing in the sides indicated that there was a concern. However, the sculpture had to be stripped down from all the paint, reworked, and then it had to be repainted. So this is part of the process, just to show you. And when the piece is done, I thought of this photograph just to show you the size. In between those beaches, the sculpture actually looked quite minuscule, but then when we are in front of it, actually, are the ones who are minuscule. One of the things that we do with this sculpture, since it's made of fiberglass, is that we do not leave it outside during the winter months. Potentially for very strong winds that can come in, or heavy snow. And so the sculpture comes actually indoors. And it's a bit of a ritual in a sense. It takes a number of people to carry it. It's not that heavy, but it does require a lot of care and how it's moved. And so every year it will go into storage for several months. That may be from November, and then in the month of March or beginning of May, very likely by the beginning of May, then it will be out. During the winter months, this is something that you can very likely see, and it is magical. It is beautiful, and how the snow rests over all these structures and all these forms. And one of the things that it makes me think about what the array of sculptures that are here, particularly outdoors, is the vocabulary, the visual vocabulary that has been developed, thought of by the collector himself. I would say that Mr. Nelson had quite a plan, and it was such a magnificent plan that we do believe in a way that if he was still around, he would still continue with that dialogue and that vocabulary, visual vocabulary on how objects work with nature. How do they coexist? How do they become an environment? And how do we, as individuals or groups of people, engage into these with these objects? And in this engagement, of course, we see sometimes beyond what the artist conceived, because nature itself provides an element that the artist may have not really considered at the time. And this is really wonderful. However, I step back and go and take the role of a conservator in a way. And of course, a lot of snow, it can be also problematic. So we know that every year we have to do very close inspections on how all the surfaces are actually fare, how the paint do. And this is not, there is not necessarily a set schedule. And I say that because the fact that we are here, we are present, then we have that opportunity to actually see these objects more constant. So that is a way of engaging and to know what the work is actually doing. And of course, in the intellectual level, I would say, well, we have that opportunity also to engage into what the artist may have intended, or what the artist was probably developing, or just in its own, what does the piece say? What does the sculpture speak? And how do we respond? Do we like what we see? Are we really interested in engaging with it? And here is an interesting place, because we have a lot of representational work and we have a lot of abstract work. There are people who may have a preference, one or the other. But in many years of having groups of people visiting and guests, it's always interesting in how, when you have an opportunity to contemplate these objects, there's always something that we find that engages us to learn more, and sometimes actually to admire the work. To admire the work not only for the what the artists made, or the concept that they came up with, but we also think about those people who have been involved in the making. A process of making art that has come for thousands of years. And today it continues. So when we look at these works of art, we think of master welders, iron workers. We think of construction workers as well. We think of our children going to school and playing with clay or making something. And it's all related. And this collection to the collector was something that very likely spoke in so many dimensions. It's an interesting example of what happens when there's a lot of snow. As you can see, this is the same piece, Dans la Nuit, by Lachaise. And it is, it's always fascinating to see this. However, it's not so good for the bronze in the long term. So we will be engaging again in doing some cleanings and making sure that all the surfaces are properly cared for. And this is trying to follow what the artist's intention may be, even in the coloration of the metal. We are very fortunate, actually, that the Lachaise Foundation has, we consider them to be truly a partner. They have come and lecture here. And for that, it's, many of us have learned a great deal. And we continue to celebrate, these artists' visions. This is the work by Peter Keeney, who we were very fortunate at one point that he came to visit us. And he was actually in his 90s. So that was a very special treat to meet the artist. Unfortunately, not enough time to engage with him, to ask him about, his work. However, there are many of the artists in these collections, actually, you will find a great deal of writing about them. And some of it is just quite impressive because, again, they were really developing a visual language that it truly took a lifetime for them. And some had a clarity that just was phenomenal. And some of them were just created an interest that, many of us, even as students, we really wanted to know more, or we started to try to follow that language, or create or try to integrate our work with that dialogue. So here we have Peter Keeney, Natura Stensa, and we can see it in a very beautiful, clear day. It's a high polish bronze with lacquer, so it doesn't, the metal doesn't tarnish. But as you can see, as we are trying to keep the water away in the winter months, there's plenty of snow. And of course, there's the rainy days. And because of that, well, we continue our work and observation in all this work. So as we moving on, actually, we come to an area called the Italian Garden, and we have a number of sculptures in there. And at the very end, there's lays this really wonderful representative a sculpture of Sleeping Ariadne by Frederick George Richard Roth. And here, what I'm doing is, in this particular time, the sculpture actually had a lot of moss, and I am conducting just a cleaning. And one of the things that I have been advised to do is soften up the moss by just having a very light spray of water. Now, this water also, I have connected to it a filter to filter some impurities or some other minerals that will also potentially can actually add to problems or more organisms rather than cleaning it. So this way we think, that is a good and a very positive outcome by using this particular method. So after the moss softens up, a very soft brush is used with a particular soap that has been actually recommended by conservators. So what I am doing, I am actually following a very specific care for these objects. And this is a bit of a result. Sometimes it's not 100%, but it doesn't have to be, because one of the things that happens with some of these works here, unfortunately, they are very fragile. And by being fragile, we cannot have many brushes that can do a lot of this work, because by using the brushes, you will be taking off some of the surface. So every once in a while, I actually do clean the sculpture, but I also reconnect with the conservator just to make sure that I will have an appropriate way of cleaning it. And that so far has really helped us to move forward. So here is another sculpture that I had been working with. It's a group of 3. This is The Kneeling Woman by George Gray Barnard. I'm sorry, The Rising Woman by George Gray Barnard. And same issue as the previous sculpture, a lot of moss. Then here's the system working. Completely wanted to show you also this view of the inner garden. I have to apologize for missing the garden, but I want to focus a little bit more into the objects so that I can share these with you. And we have a number of pieces here. We have two circus women by Nadelman. Then we have a sculpture which is actually made of iron. And as you can imagine, well, taking care of iron and taking care of bronze, there are some differences in how they are treated. Iron actually would be more porous, and if it's not sealed, will deteriorate a lot more rapid. And but in this case, again, I continue to follow the directions and how these sculptures need to be taken care of. And as long as we continue, we seem to be doing, really well. Of course, there's always the considerations that sometime in the future, as these surfaces do change, then we regroup to think about the approach that we need to take. And for that, we continue to develop our relationship with a number of conservators, and that really helps us a great deal. Here is a sculpture by Henry Moore in nuclear energy. And here in the top actually is an element that should be polished. So there's a slightly unclear, in a way, what this polish means to everybody. So, but we make our effort in it. And at this moment, I would say that I was very thrilled that Henry Moore Foundation had seen the work and felt that it truly represented the artist's work. One of the things that is interesting as you enter and you're coming to Kaikit and you go to the forecourt, you will see this amazing monumental sculpture, which is a replica by the work of John Bologna. Now, the fountain, the plate of the fountain, is actually granite, and that was made in Maine. One thing that I will share with you is that all our sculptures that are made out of stone, concrete, or marble, or any other stone, there are likely to be wrapped for the winter. This is a view from behind, and here we have Oceanos at the very top and Adam and Eve at the bottom. And this is also the work of George Gray Barnard. A number of years ago, there was actually a conservation treatment that had to be performed. So a conservator was hired with his crew. They came in and they did an incredible work. And of course, they left the piece just looking phenomenal. And here's a little bit of how we are challenged in trying to do this work. And what we did here is basically we cover the pieces. And with this cover here, one of the elements that really is extraordinary is always the wind. So this, as magnificent as it looks, was not a very good day. However, we got the work done. And this is how it will look like during the winter time. We are also very thrilled and excited. We have a program with students from Mexico, where 3 different schools actually join us, and their top students come and work along with me in the conservation as a part of the practice. And now we have celebrated our 10th year, and we hope to continue the coming year. And you can see them here convening and exchanging. There happen to be 3 students from 3 different schools, so they very likely have never met each other. But this is part of our outreach with other colleagues in museums who have been just amazing. And we're very grateful that they have opened their doors to talk to us, to show us what they do, to share their thoughts. And for that, again, we're very thankful and grateful, and we are here for them as well to share our perspectives and experiences. So I'll show you some of the pieces that are around the grounds. And this is a wonderful girl in a swing. And we have Elevation by Lachaise. And here's this really wonderful piece made out of a pink granite. And this is a triangular surface in space by Max Bill. We have two other works here by Brancusi and by Giacometti. We have this really wonderful piece by Raymond de Champollion, which is The Horse. And this is a very, very important piece in regards to the concept of the future, where this is a time where and we can see inside part of this collection a number of artists who had been really embracing the thought of the futurism, and this being one of them as well. And I'll like to show you this piece by Herbert Ferber. And one of the interesting things about this photograph that it was perhaps by chance, but we can see how these structures are actually an echo of nature, and how they actually fit in, or how the artist, perhaps maybe knowing or not knowing, creating this dialogue. And I would say that, in fact, is the curator or the person who installed it, trying to find a dialogue, trying to have the sensitivity for what the work is. And for us today, from the curatorial department, I would say that our goal here is to remain as close as possible to what it was given to this collection. Displacement, the care, and most importantly, what the RBF is doing now, which is the outreach, is to engage with all of you to come and visit us, come and join us in our public program, which it goes from readings to dance to music and more. It's to stroll in the gardens and to find ourselves in nature. We have these amazing gardens with flowers and their little critters that are part of all. And this is an example of sometimes not exactly what we will like to see, having deer running, but sometimes it does happen. And when it happens, it's quite interesting. And someone was very interested in my lunch, and he showed up in my bag. And I had no idea what it was, but I was told that this is a flying squirrel, and it's quite just a beautiful little thing. With that, I would say, well, this is a collection that is to be contemplated. It is a place for us to contemplate our thoughts, to exercise our ability to engage, not only with the sculptures and many of the things that we have. It's also nature itself in a society that continues to at times, or continues to struggle to define itself, continues to struggle to be progressive and to advance in so many aspects. And for that, I would say, well, we invite you to come and join us and be part of this dialogue, be part of these conversations. And we're interested to know more about you. We're interested to hear and to experience with you being here. So I like to invite you come and engage with us in conversation. And here, we would like to thank you and come and join us here at the Pocantico Center.